Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley here again to bring you another episode of the show. We appreciate all of you tuning in here, whether you're listening on your podcast app of choice, whether you're watching this on YouTube. We really appreciate it, and thank you all so much for tuning in and giving us support here in the offseason, heading into the last couple weeks of April now. Gene, we're getting some heat finally. There hasn't been a whole lot of movement, a whole lot of things to report on really for transfer portal recruiting stuff, but now finally we're nearing the end of the month. Some guys are starting to make some decisions, it looks like. So hopefully we'll have some more solid news here soon. Lady Vols have been killing it. They picked up another transfer from Missouri State, Jasmine Franklin. I will hopefully be able to get her on the show and interview her. We'll see about that, but we'll let you all know if it happens. But Gene, on the men's side of things here, got a couple of questions. This is going to be a mailbag episode, so thank you all so much for sending in your questions for this episode. If you see your name on here, thank you. I'm going to have the questions flash up on the screen on YouTube. So if you're listening, you won't see it, but you also hear your, Twitter handle called out. But if you are here watching, please give this video a like. We'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel while you're here too. Again, also appreciate that. But share this around, and hopefully we give you all some satisfactory answers to your great questions. Well, Gene, let's start off here with kind of I'm going to kind of try to figure out the order I want to go in. An easier one to kind of get the ball rolling here is from @KBest51 on Twitter, where they ask, what are the rules for the transfer portal? How late can teams add players from the portal? Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe May 1st is the deadline in terms of if you want to be immediately eligible and use your 1 year, the granted eligibility waiver that everyone was granted, that, you don't have to be a grad transfer. You can just use your, one-time transfer rule. I believe players have to put their name into the portal by May 1st to qualify. You can still put your name in the portal after that, but unless you're a grad transfer, there's not a guarantee that you're going to get, be eligible for the next season. So I believe May 1st is the deadline for the one-time transfer to be guaranteed that you can play next season.
That's my understanding as well. Obviously, some certain things I've been trying to deal with because of a couple situations here in Chattanooga that would maybe change some of that. Like there's a kid who's put his name in the draft, but he hadn't put his name in the portal yet, and there's question. But yeah, as far as kids who have not graduated, then you have until May 1st to officially put your name in the portal, which is good because you don't draw these things out. And I think last year it was like June 1st. You had kids the whole month of May doing it. So at some point you've got to put your roster together. So yeah, May 1st is a good date, and May 1st is the answer to this question.
Yep. All right. Well, that was a pretty easy one to get on the ball rolling here. So let's move on to one about kind of looking at who Tennessee could add. This is @Tennessee Sport 8 on Twitter. Who will Tennessee most likely get out of the transfer portal? Then list off a few options here. You have Tyreek Key, Yuri Collins, and they mentioned Julian Phillips, but Julian is not a transfer, that is a recruit. But still mentioning just Julian Phillips as a potential, addition for Tennessee as well. So out of those, who is Tennessee most likely to get? Tyreek Key, Yuri Collins, Julian Phillips, and then also they add, thanks, love the show. So thank you. Appreciate you sending in the question. Appreciate you listening in. Gene, to me, it seems like two of those three seem actually very likely right now for the Vols. I believe Tyreek Key has gotten a couple crystal balls on 247 for Tennessee. He just visited Tennessee this past week, I want to say. I think also was visiting or going to visit Texas Tech. So Tennessee is in the thick of things with him, and he's of course a Tennessee native. He played high school in Tennessee, went to Indiana State, played there for several years, and then put his name in the transfer portal last offseason. Tennessee was interested in him, contacted him, and I don't remember if he visited or not, but they were, would love to have added him last year. But then he decided to stay at Indiana State. He ended up having shoulder surgery and didn't play at all this past season. It looked like his shoulder had been bothering him for a little while because you saw his numbers drop off in the 2020-2021 season. And then, of course, he didn't play at all last year. But Gene, I think he is probably the most likely of all that grouping. But I still think Yuri Collins is not far behind. I think Tennessee gets him too. Like it seems like all the signs behind the scenes are pointing to Tennessee landing Yuri Collins. I don't think he's set up a schedule or anything like that officially right now, but already saw like not long after he announced his transfer destination that there were reporters and stuff in the St. Louis area already mentioning that Tennessee was a front runner for him. We've talked about both these guys on the podcast already, but Yuri Collins, a point guard who led the nation in assists, also the nation in turnovers. But when you handle the ball much as he did, and have the assist numbers that he had, you're still going to turn the ball over some too. But he still had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio while averaging almost 8 assists per game. That's pretty solid. Tyreek Key again was a guy who a couple years ago was a 44% 3-point shooter. Then like a 39% 3-point shooter before his shoulder started bothering him, and that dropped like 32, 33 in his, I guess, fourth year at Indiana State. I think fourth year at Indiana State before he had the shoulder surgery. But Gene, I think Tyreek Key and Yuri Collins are both almost kind of neck and neck in terms of odds. I'm not feeling great about Julian Phillips. It seems almost like I don't want to say like the highest bidder is where he'll go, but it's in the area of NIL, like that doesn't feel as slimy to say anymore as it did, a couple of years ago. Go make your money, kid. Like if you think if you can get more money somewhere, go there and make the money. Like he's a talented kid. Looks like he's going to go visit at Kansas State and Auburn. Tennessee and FSU were teams that were in it before he committed and ultimately signed with LSU before backing out because of the firing of Will Wade. But Gene, I think Key and Collins are pretty even odds in terms of, I think both those guys have high odds, and even in terms of like, I think both are very likely to come to Tennessee. But I'm not feeling great right now about Julian Phillips and Tennessee's chances of getting him. They still can, but I don't know that Tennessee's going to have the NIL money necessarily to throw at him that he's maybe looking for at this point.
Yeah, and I think since Kevin Durant, who was the last elite wing that Rick Barnes has landed?
That's a good question. I have to go back and check that. That's a really good question.
I feel like that. Yeah, I feel like it's a system. Like sometimes styles make fights and systems make players, and that's no knock on any individual player. I just always know that certain players will look better in other systems. And you're talking about a kid who's 6'8", who is listed as a combo forward, can do a lot of different things on the court. And while I'm mentioning this, if I was Tennessee, I would probably make a run at Ace Bailey. I know this is completely unrelated. This is a 2024 kid, but I watched him play 2 weekends ago, and that kid is elite. He's a 6'8" sophomore. Just kind of tuck that name like deep somewhere. But like you're talking about a system that's very reliant on guards. If that's why I think Collins is such a slam dunk option. That's why I think he is such a slam dunk option, because you're talking about two guys who are experienced and can kind of come right in and play. The Phillips thing, again, we were joking before the podcast started that this was probably going to go to the highest bidder, and I just don't know. I just don't know about, kids aren't dumb nowadays. And so when you are checking out the landscape of all the places that you could potentially go, and you maybe, some of these kids are doing their homework, especially at your highest level schools. Like, what would make, when you look at some of the kids that, the teams that have been successful for Tennessee under Rick Barnes, you don't have many elite wings out there. What was the kid that from Dyer County that was a 5-star, Hubbs?
Yeah.
He never played. At no point did he play under Barnes, if I recall.
Actually,
okay,
he might have his. Oh my gosh! I'm
that
going to
first
check.
season, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'm going to double check that. 'Cause I think his last year was Barnes's first year. So let me check that.
Right. And even then, that wasn't a system that was necessarily great.
Yeah, that was the third head coach in 3 years type
hire.
situation. So let's see.
Yeah.
In 2015, 2016, Robert Hubbs, yes, he was on the roster that season, and he played in 30 games that year for Tennessee.
Gotcha. So, and how, was he like exponentially better that year than he was other years, or I guess
that was the year where he had so many injuries. It's hard to like
gotcha.
quantify.
But
Actually, he played 2
wondering.
years with Herb Barnes. He played, yeah, and actually he got, his senior year was his best year, so he actually did improve. I mean, it wasn't like the most drastic improvement you've ever seen, but he did improve. But he had so many injuries and stuff; it was hard to like quantify. But he went from basically playing almost the same amount of minutes from his second year to his third year, and increased his point production by over about almost 3.5 points, and rebounds by a rebound per game. So I mean, his shooting from threes went down, but his shooting from inside the arc went up. So yeah, he got better with under Rick Barnes. I'll say that he did get better, got healthier. That was kind of the key.
Unfortunately, since then, they really haven't had that just guy that's come in. Like I think Admiral was a good player. Let's be clear. I think Admiral still bouncing around the league a little bit, but I mean, like that was a perfect fit of a kid who came in, grew, developed, and a lot of these kids aren't necessarily looking at this from a come in and develop and all. They want to be good right away. Is that realistic? I don't know. I just think that when we're talking about the creme de la creme of prospects, then you kind of have to look at things from the perspective of how good can I be right away? Are there certain places I can go that I can be good right away? And I think that when Julian Phillips looks at a Tennessee, he asks the question, can he be good right away? Especially when you look, and I mean, all the guards that are coming in, not to mention you'd have to fend off somebody like Josiah Jordan-James. And who's a 5-star too. So if you want to do the whole 5-star thing, then like this kid was probably rated about as well as you were, and has developed into a wing, in his time in Knoxville. So I just don't think it's a good fit. I understand that you have to make a run at him, but I just don't think I've never really thought that was a good marriage, a good fit between the two sides. I mean, he could choose Tennessee and completely like shock me and crush it. I just think that there are better situations for Phillips to go to than Tennessee, where he can be more productive right away. But yeah, I mean, like you get Key, who's 6'3", 6'4". You've got Collins, who's listed at 6 feet even. You bring those two kids in, maybe shake the portal, because I think that gives you three additions now with B.J. Edwards?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or that's it. Like that's all they've brought in so far. So they've still got a lot of work to do, if I recall, because they've lost Bailey. They've lost Chandler. So
you still have a couple more spots after that. Yeah, because you've technically had 5 holes to fill, and then B.J. Edwards fills one of them. And if you get both Key and Collins, that's 2 more, so that you have 2 more spots to fill, if I did the math correctly.
Gotcha. And that's what I was thinking. So, yeah, I think that obviously you've got to go find guys who are proper fits. Like recruiting is so much of a year-to-year thing now. It's hard. It's something that's hard for me to adjust to, because all of my thought process is always, big picture thinking, which means you're not looking at the right now. Like you're looking at how this can be good 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And that's how we've all been wired to think in terms of college. Mm-hmm. Specifically, fans, I don't claim fandom of any team, but I mean, like when you watch, I would be frustrated, with, I understand everybody wants to blame NIL, whatever. It's here. You can say it's going to kill it, but I would say, ridiculous contracts being paid to head coaches is killing it just as much, especially when they can leave 2 years later. But you have to say we've all kind of had to readjust our thinking now, because, it's all year to year. Like and I understand like the tiers. I've talked to coaches about the tiers of recruiting now, and it's like graduate transfers, it's transfer portal, it's your own roster, it's JUCOs, and then it's high school kids, and it's pretty much in that order. I mean, there aren't that many. I mean, and, obviously Julian Phillips is the exception.
Yeah.
Because if it weren't for a firing, he wouldn't be available.
Mm-hmm.
Guys that you really want that could be available at this level, at the Tennessee level, they're already gone. Like, because I mean, you're getting a commitment, you're getting a signing, and you're like, well, we're locked in, let's go. But it's so different now, and that's something that I think we've all kind of had to adjust to where, like it stinks for these high school kids that because of the COVID and all this, that, and the other, that everybody has an additional year. I mean, like obviously everybody knows that listen to this podcast, I cover UTC, who picked up a kid today, Jamal Johnson, who's on his fourth school. He played at Memphis, he played at Auburn, he played at UAB, and he had one more year. He has one more year left. He's coming to Chattanooga, and so like if it weren't for the COVID year, he wouldn't have it. So like there's so many things that are making all this stuff hard to really develop a roster. So you have to look at all this stuff from 1 year increments. I mean, you thought you were gonna have Huntley Hatfield for a year or two, got him for a year, and he didn't leave happy. He didn't necessarily leave making the team better. You kind of figured you were going to have Chandler for a year. Got it. Kind of expected. Tamba, you maybe thought he was a developmental guy. You could have him for 5 years. Didn't happen. Kid got 1 year. We'll see where he ends up, but I don't see him going. He won't make a lateral move. Best situation he ever had was where he was just at. And he'll go down now. And it's fine. He can be successful. He can be a successful player at, Southern Conference sort of school. Like, there's no knock on that. It's Division I basketball. Like, heck, UTC and Tennessee have split the last 2 times they've played. And so, I mean, you're talking about a situation where you've got to change this. You've got to adjust this. These kids are always trying to figure this stuff out. And we're all trying to figure it out in real time as well. But you get these two, see what else you need. Find you a couple of experienced bigs in the portal, and you should be fine going into next season. But I think that the two kids that were mentioned are right now all we know about.
Well, that leads in really well to yeah. So that leads really well into the next question here from Andrew Davis at Andrew D 2001 on Twitter, who says, "How do you think Tennessee's rotation will look if they do add Keon Collins?" And he also adds kind of a follow up to that is, do you think B.J. Edwards gets much playing time? So the rotation. That's the interesting question to me, Gene, is because I 100% think adding an experienced point guard makes a lot of sense with the way the roster looks with you having a sophomore Sakai Ziegler and a freshman B.J. Edwards, who yes, we did just have 2 true freshmen for Tennessee be the primary ball handlers last year, but that was a different. Kennedy Chandler is a totally different breed of point guard. He was one of the better point guard prospects coming out of high school in the last few years. He was a very talented kid that you wouldn't mind, handing the keys over to, and you trusted him. Ziegler was a nice surprise. Like I was going to be curious to see what had happened if Ziegler didn't emerge, because would have had Vescovy be the backup point guard? Because I mean, you didn't have another option, and Ziegler kind of, I wouldn't say fell into your lap, but you got lucky that you were able to scout him when you did and find him when you did, and get him to commit and stuff. But they have him, and he was a really good backup and really good, late in the game situations too, when you had your 4-guard or 3-guard lineups. To me, I think if Collins is coming here, he's coming to start. Like I don't think he's coming here to back up. I think Uri Collins is coming to Tennessee if he comes to Tennessee, to be the starting point guard. So I think he's your starter, and you have, I still think late in games you go to a more guard heavy lineup, because I think Tennessee's guards are just still better than their forwards overall, especially late in games. I think you'll see Vescovy out there. I think you'll see Ziegler out there, and I think you'll see, probably Collins out there as well. In that case, with Key, it's going to be interesting, because that to me makes me think if they get him, miss out on Julian Phillips, and see kind of where they go with the rest of the spots. If they try to go after another big man in the recruiting class, go the international route, or go to a big man in the portal. But Gene, I think that to me, if they get Key, I don't know that he'll start, but I think he's a guy that could be your 6th, 7th man, a guy who plays a pretty good amount of minutes off the bench is kind of what I'm feeling. But he's a guy that fills the, I guess, kind of the 2-3 role. And I think if he's in as a 3, because you have Vescovy at the 2, then I think you see Josiah at the 4. And I think overall this year you're going to see what you saw last season once Olivier Kielma went down, which is still more small ball lineups. I just think that's just how Tennessee's roster is going to be more guard heavy, going to be more guys that are 6'4" and shorter. You have more of them than you do guys who were taller than 6'7". So I think it's just going to be more guard heavy, and you'll see more of that kind of play out as the season goes on. Of course, that's all considered. Key's big thing for me is how does he recover from that shoulder surgery? Because he didn't play all last year, which maybe that's good. Maybe he needed the whole year to recover. And it's not like a Lamonte Turner situation where he just kept trying, and he maybe should have had surgery beforehand. And also, Lamonte's was a freak thing where the only other person that I heard of who ever had that was the NBA player. I just forgot his name, but it was a really not a common thing. I don't think Yuri Collins had that issue. But Gene, I think the more interesting thing too is not just figuring the rotation's interesting too, but BJ Edwards is intriguing. You've seen him play, and I was going to defer to you on that specific point more than my opinion, because he seems kind of like a combo guard. I don't know that he's a combo guard to the same extent like Lamonte Turner was, because I think he's a more suited to play point guard than Lamonte was when he first got in. Lamonte learned point guard position and got better at it as he came along, but he was more of a shooter off ball type guy when he got here. But I think BJ is a combo guard, but I don't adding Collins, having Zakai on campus already, having Vescovy, likely returning on campus already. I don't know that BJ Edwards plays. I mean, he's going to play this year. I think he's talented enough to play. I don't know that he's going to play maybe as big of a role as he thought he was when he first committed. I think he's still committed for the long run. He's not a one and done type guy. But I think 10, 15 minutes a game maybe kind of is what I would see for BJ Edwards. I think he plays. I don't think he's going to redshirt, but I'm intrigued because you've seen him play more than I have in person, and I know you've talked about his game before on the podcast, so I'm interested in your thoughts on that. So what do you think kind of BJ Edwards' minutes are going to be, and then rotation wise, are you like me? Are you expecting it to be more of a small ball lineup for Tennessee this year?
Yeah, I can see that. I'm gonna make a weird comparison. I always like making weird comparisons.
I like your weird comparisons, Gene.
Yeah. But I'm gonna say for BJ Edwards, I'm gonna go Vescovy. And okay. I'll say that he's not as good of a shooter, obviously, but if you can get that sort of production, because you'll get them in different ways, but I think they're similar sort of players because they're about 6'3", 6'4". They can play multiple positions. You can use them in a myriad of ways. Whereas obviously Vescovy is a better shooter. I think that BJ is probably stronger, is better at attacking the basket, will probably be a better defender than Vescovy will be. And so if you get that in a different way, but you get similar sort of production, then I think that that's a good fit for him. But he's going to be the type of guy that gives you maybe 5-10 minutes a year. And I think that'll be good production from him. So as far as how much do I see BJ playing this year? Not a lot, because if you can get the same sort of production out of Vescovy, who's older, then why would you need Edwards? If you've already got Key in there, who's also going to be, I think, will play a sort of role similar to Vescovy, why would you need BJ? If you can get in a senior, unless the freshman is that much exponentially better, why would you go to a freshman? You wouldn't. Same thing with Collins. So I think the minutes just get tougher. Where does Justin Powell fit into this? I mean, we all fall in love with the shiny new toys. We kind of forget about the ones that we've already had. And you've got Zealer returning, you've got Powell returning, you've got obviously the People's Champ Josiah. A guy who can just play a number of different places. And so I don't know if there's a spot. I think you just run out of spots. And, after this season, now I think what will be interesting is if you have BJ, how does the recruiting look this time next year? Because this time next year you would have had a full year to kind of analyze what you got in BJ. And if they go out there and start going after a bunch of combo guards next year, that maybe play a different style. And again, I think BJ is very capable of playing the point. Let's be clear. There's no we're saying combo guard, And I think a lot of people are maybe underselling how good B.J. Edwards is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because he doesn't have the quote-unquote star ranking of other players. But that kid's a really good player. Like, I've seen him live multiple times. I saw him at the IMG game. I guess that was in 2020, maybe. The IMG Knox Catholic game in Knoxville.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when that was too. I think it was 21. No, because I think it was. Golly, I don't remember.
It was 20. It was 20. I was covering Tennessee at the time. I know that for a fact. I think it was either 19 or 20. I'm pretty sure it was 20. Yeah, it was 20. So I sat there and watched that game when he was a sophomore, and I'm like, oh no, this kid can play, and he's the type of kid who will play better in the moment. Like, I don't know what he had in that game, probably like 25 or something. I don't remember. I don't know. Who cares about that? Maybe not even that many. Maybe he had like 15, 20. But you're talking about a guy who can play. And I think there's something to be said for just being a really good basketball player, even just because you can't jump 45 inches or do something stupid like that doesn't mean that you're any less of a basketball player. You may get production differently than you got it from Kennedy Chandler, but that doesn't mean that you're any less effective. Chandler and Ziegler weren't the same player. But Ziegler was let's be honest. We've had enough time to say this. There wasn't much separation from how good and how, productive the two players were to the program. I understand Chandler had better stats, but there were a lot of times where the offense didn't look a bit different when Ziegler was in there as opposed to Chandler. And so you can get to your end destination any number of ways, but which is the one that you choose to go with? And like I said, I think that BJ's a guy who can contribute. Now, will it be next year? Possibly not, just because I think the spots are filling up. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be, at this point, they better go find some guys that have some size to them. Otherwise, they're going to be one of the smallest teams in the country. Because last time I checked, once you get past Olivier and Eurosh, am I forgetting a bunch of bigs that are still in the program? Because Fulkerson's gone, Huntley Hatfield's gone, Tomba's gone. I feel like they only had 5.
You got Adu in there too. But yeah.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. And I like him as a player too. So, mm-hmm. Yeah, you better, because you don't want to go into a season with your whole lineup being 6 foot, 6 foot to 6'6", and then you sprinkle in a 7-footer. A 6'10", 6'11" kid and a 6'8" kid that's coming off an injury. Like, that's not a recipe to be good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how good your guards are, you'll get pounded. Heck, they got pounded a lot this year. They had 5 guys at times. So, yeah, like, I understand, and with all due respect, Julian Phillips ain't helping there. Because last time I checked, he was, 200 pounds?
Yeah.
Maybe 205, 6'8", whatever. Like, he ain't helping with that problem. I think you come to a point now where you got to get away from, you've already got Edwards, you've got these other kids coming in. You need to go ahead and put all this other stuff to bed and find some bigs that are capable of just being, role guys, because that's all Tennessee's bigs are anyway. They're all just kind of glorified role guys. That's it, role players, and that's it. You may get a good game out of Olivier, but you don't expect it. You may get a good game out of Eurosh, but you don't expect it. Same thing with Adu, and with Adu. You don't expect it. You expect them to do, take care of business on the offensive end in terms of screens and maybe the occasional offensive rebound, or if one of the guards throws you the ball, catch it and dunk it. But you don't expect. You can find 2 kids who have played at mid-major Division I basketball who have eligibility remaining who can do that. That's all you need. Quit running after all these star guys and go find some guys. 5-star. Guess what 5-star bigs want to do? 9 times out of 10, they want to play.
Yep.
They want to score, because in their mind, I always make this comparison. Grant Williams was not necessarily developed as a basketball player. He was always a post player who just now is starting to learn, he's developed a part of his game that he did not otherwise have. He was a good shooter at Tennessee. He didn't shoot it enough. Rick Barnes was begging him to shoot threes. He didn't have the confidence to shoot them in games enough. so he didn't shoot a ton. So you see that. Like, but Huntley Hatfield was the kid who played out in the wing. Adu was the kid who always played out in the wing. That's why the offensive part of Adu's game has come slowly. Like, I mean, he may have hit like a 6-foot jump shot at one point, but a lot of his stuff was dunks and putbacks. And that's fine. And that's perfectly fine. But, like, you have to understand, like, you know, these kids want to kind of be what they are. You got to change that. And, like, you know, like, I'd much rather go out and get some kids who have played the mid-major, you know, who are Great Williams types. You know, I mean, they don't have to be as good as him. But they need to be kind of kids who are about 6'7" to 6'10", who are perfect, like I said, who are perfectly okay just taking care of their business. Go set screens, go defend, go rebound, maybe hit the occasional three, pump up the crowd, dunk, salute that massive Tennessee student section, whatever, with tank dog salute. I don't care what you do. But Tennessee's about the guards. Let's be clear about that. So, I mean, as you can see with all the people that are about to get in the portal, we think.
Yeah, I would back that up with what you said about the kind of maybe going after in the post. You need one more post body regardless of who it is and kind of how you get it. But you're right, like what you have right now is not going to win. But like we've said, they have openings still. This is not a complete, even with adding potentially Key and Collins, like that's still not a complete roster. There's still room to add some more. We'll get to actually. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of questions that I want to go towards, and I'm trying to figure out which one of them that I want to go to next. I think the next one I'm going to go to is kind of builds off that better. I think so. It's from Derek on Twitter at thegymrat13. Says, what is this team's ceiling next year, assuming Collins, Key, Phillips all jump aboard? So I'm going to take out Phillips. Sorry, Derek. I know that was kind of altering your question here a little bit. But looking at adding Collins and Key, again, I know we just talked about, you need a post person. I feel like it's hard to answer this question, Jans, maybe why I'm putting it here, because I think we can kind of talk about just a tiny bit and kind of move on, because it's still not, this is not a complete team yet. But I think it's worth looking at comparing try to make like an apples to apples comparison of technically like who is Collins, looking at who's departed Tennessee's roster and who Tennessee's adding, who is Collins replacing, who is Key replacing. To me, I think Tyreek Key is replacing, Victor Bailey Jr. basically. From that, him, or it's not Quentin DeBonge, so I would say it's Victor Bailey Jr. is basically who Tyreek Key is replacing, because he's a guy who shot the ball really well before his injury. But he's also a guy who can attack the basket and is built like he's a big guy. I think he's like 6'3", 200 something pounds. Like he's a bigger body guard.
205, I think.
Yeah, like that's not bad size for a 6'3" guy either. But look, I've seen pictures of him. He's got some muscle on him already. So like he's a pretty big guy. So I think to me, Key is replacing Bailey, and I think that's an upgrade, because I think Key has better defense than what Bailey had. Just looking at kind of like defensive stats and stuff. So I think that's an upgrade. If at worst, I think it's a push. But I think if it's a push from like Victor Bailey from the previous season, not this last year, because this last year he dropped off the face of the planet for Tennessee, but he was a pretty good contributor the year before. I think what he did the year before could be kind of what you expect from Key. So I guess he would be an upgrade then in that respect from what Victor Bailey was this past year. Collins, I guess, is replacing Kenny Chandler, which I'm sorry for the Yuri Collins, but that's a downgrade. I mean, Kenny Chandler was just a phenomenal player. I don't think that Collins is capable of creating his own shot the way that Kennedy did, and attacking the rim and finishing at the rim the way Kennedy could. So I think Collins is a downgrade, but at the same time, I still think Collins is a really good player. But technically, you're replacing Kennedy Chandler almost by a committee with adding in Collins and also adding in BJ Edwards, who's a as we talked about, a combo guard, but who's a very talented combo guard who's capable of playing point guard and shooting guard both. So kind of, I guess, by committee is Collins and Edwards, but it's still a downgrade to me because of how good Chandler was. But Collins is an experienced player who has been in college for 3 years, I think, and played really well for St. Louis, especially this past year. And he's played pretty well against high major competition. I looked up his stats and stuff against Power 6 schools basically, and he's played some pretty good games against those teams and had pretty good assist to turnover ratio against a couple of SEC schools as well. They played Auburn and they played a few other, I think, again, high major schools. But again, we don't know all the new additions yet. But the ceiling for next year's team, Gene, is just with those two additions, looking at it as it is, because again, I don't think they get Phillips. If they get Phillips, I think he's a pretty. I mean, he's a true freshman, so it's hard to like gauge. How does he replace Brandon Huntley Hatfield, because that's who he's replacing. But they're not the same body size, they're not the same type of player. So again, it's also hard to like quantify that. But I'm assuming they don't get Julian Phillips in this equation. But Gene, you got to think, if they add Collins and Key, if they go add a quality big man who is capable of, doesn't have the start, but is capable of giving you some good minutes, and like you said, like doing the dirty work, getting rebounds, being able to at least maybe shoot a little bit, have an offensive game that's worth talking about down low, along with Camwa, who was developing a pretty decent offensive game down low. Like, I like this team. I don't know. It's just gonna be very interesting to see who they add, because it really depends on how they fill those last couple spots. Where they go. Do they go for a wing player? Do they go for a true post, like 4 or 5 guy? But I think the addition of Collins and Key, I think they make this team, quite a bit better, and they add experience in the backcourt, where Tennessee right now is lacking a lot of experience aside from Vescovy. Because I guess you could technically count, I guess, Josiah is like a weird hybrid where he can play the post, but he plays in the wing too. So he's a wing player. So you got Josiah and Vescovy, but the rest of those guys are all really young. Ziegler played a full season last year, but he's still, a young guy. You have BJ Edwards, who's young. Justin Powell he's still pretty young too. He basically had his freshman year last year. So adding the experience of Key and Collins is huge for that backcourt, in my opinion, too. So I think, I think the ceiling is maybe higher than what some people may think for Tennessee next year, but it's really going to depend a lot on how they fill the rest of the holes. But I do think if they end up landing both Collins and Key, that really does raise Tennessee's ceiling quite a bit, because I think it brings a lot of factors to Tennessee's backcourt and Tennessee's roster that they really needed to address this offseason.
Those are good points. I think that getting the kids that they currently have, well, they don't currently have them, but you kind of think that, you think that Key's coming, you think that Collins is coming. I think it makes them better. I'm not sure how good it makes them right now, because, I just look at a team that struggled to really generate offense when when the guards weren't out here, being great. And again, I'm always just going to be a firm proponent of how many ways can you win games, and can you win games when you're not making shots? We talked about it numerous times last year. Can you win games when you're not making shots? And if you're basically taking out Victor Bailey, Kennedy Chandler, and you're replacing them with Key and Collins and BJ Edwards, then you're essentially the same team at that position, but now you're also replacing John Fulkerson, who won you a game last year. Specifically won you a game last year.
Mm-hmm.
And you lost Huntley Hatfield, who started a lot of games last year. And you lost Tamba, but okay, it is what it is. And what are you replacing that with? So if we're talking about what are the prospects of this team, I got to give them an incomplete right now, because as you said, we got to see what this thing looks like in the end. Let's not fall in love with with 2 transfers who have played at, they've been productive, but they've also done it at lower levels. In theory, 1,600 points, I think, is what Key was at in his Indiana State career. The point guard is kind of like the kid that went to Kentucky this year, from Georgia.
Oh yeah, Severe Wheeler.
Yeah, you look at just some of the stuff where the kid, sometimes he scores a little bit. I don't know how good of a shooter he is, but he's really great at distributing the ball to other people. And that's certainly a down. That's certainly not the same as what you just had with Kennedy Chandler, because Kennedy can go get you 20, 25, 30.
Yep.
This kid has not shown that he can. I'm not saying he can't. I'm saying he hasn't shown. And we've got 2 years of a sample size to see that. He hasn't shown that he could do it. So, at this moment, at this moment, I say they take a step back. I don't know how big of a step back it is. Last year last year we both kind of correctly pegged them to be like low 20s, and then they won the SEC tournament, won a game in the NCAA. This year, I just don't know if that's going to be the case until we see what you replace Fulkerson and Huntley, Hatfield, and Tomba, how you use those 3 scholarship spots.
You made a really good, I think, comparison to Severe Wheeler and Yuri Collins. There's slight differences. I think Yuri is a better defender. He at least has better steal numbers. I mean, that's not, that doesn't make a defender better necessarily, but he does have higher steal kind of per game and overall steal numbers than what Severe Wheeler has done in his college career. But their numbers are pretty similar. Yuri Collins in 3 seasons at St. Louis shot 42% overall, averaged basically about 6.5 field goal attempts per game. Severe Wheeler averages actually more field goal attempts per game, which is kind of crazy because he doesn't shoot the ball a whole lot, but he's averaged 9.5 in his career at Georgia and Kentucky. But he also has shot 43%. It's like there's like a not much difference between there's 42% for Yuri Collins, 43% for Wheeler. Collins is a better 3-point shooter, 33% to Severe Wheeler's 27.5%. They both don't shoot the 3 ball a whole lot, though, is the other thing, too. Free throws, again, similar. Yuri's a 70% free throw shooter. Wheeler's 73%. And then points per game in his career, Wheeler has had basically 11 and 6 assists, where Collins has had 7.5 and then 6.5 assists. And again, the steal numbers are a little different, where in 3 seasons, Yuri Collins has totaled 134 steals, whereas Wheeler has totaled 102. So again, even not like that's not like that much of a difference either. So yeah, I think it's a really good comparison, Yuri Collins to Severe Wheeler, because right now Yuri is listed as a 6 foot 185 guard, and Wheeler is 5'10", 180. So he's got a little bit taller than him, but again, it's not like they're both in terms of basketball players like super tall or anything like that. But I think that's a pretty apt comparison. I will be interested to see, what he does for Tennessee if he comes to Tennessee, and how, like you said, you go from a guy who could drop 15, 20, 25 points on a team to a guy who hasn't really done that much in his career at a smaller school. It wasn't like, Severe Wheeler was doing that at Georgia, which, say what you want about Georgia, it is an SEC school. St. Louis has been a good A-10 school, though, just not, again, they don't play to the exact same level of competition that, Severe Wheeler had at Georgia, and then, of course, when he came to Kentucky. So I think it's a pretty good comparison, Gene. Again, your comparisons are usually pretty good. I like hearing them. The last one here about the men's team, and then we have one quick one about the Lady Vols I wanted to get to, because I'll hopefully be doing a Lady Vols specific podcast next week, and we'll kind of cover those questions and more stuff as well on that one. But the next one is another one here from Andrew Davis, Andrew D 2001 on Twitter. I wanted to include it because I thought it was a really good one to talk about. It's actually 2 questions, and I think both are really good. So the first one is going to be, what players are you expecting the biggest jump from next season? I think if you're Tennessee, you hope it's a post player. Like, you hope it's a Jonas Adu. Like, that to me would be for Tennessee, the ideal answer is if Jonas Adu takes, a big jump. That probably means really good things for Tennessee, because it gives you a bona fide, 5 that you feel good out there, playing, 20, 25 minutes in a game and trusting him, or at least trusting him more. They already trust him, I think, pretty well on defense. It's a matter of his offensive game that really needs to take that next step. To be, Gene, for Tennessee's sake, they better hope it is Jonas Adu. But I almost want to say it could be Josiah, just from based on what we saw in the last, 3 weeks of the season. I mean, you could technically say maybe he already had his big jump kind of last year at the end of the year. But you're going to look at kind of overall, total season production. It could be Josiah, from a guy who's averaged, 9 points a game in his Tennessee career. This last year, he finally kind of eclipsed that double-digit mark and ended up averaging 10.3 points per game on the season. But he was a guy who it seemed like he'd found that 3-point stroke finally as the season was closing out and got into SEC tournament and NCAA tournament. I almost wonder if he's a guy that ends up, maybe finding his own and finally has found that offensive rhythm and goes and averages 15 points a game. I don't think so. It just doesn't seem like Josiah's game to go be a guy who averages 14, 15 points a game. But he's a sneaky one to keep an eye on because he'd already kind of shown a lot of improvement as the year went on last year. Does he take another big step? But I think for Tennessee's sake, they better hope it's a guy like Jonas Adu. And I think he has the most potential to take another big step forward. It could be maybe Olivier Campbell, but I think last year you'd kind of quantify that as his kind of breakout year before he got hurt. So again, how much has he really improved the numbers that he already was doing with 8-6 basically on the year? Does he bump it up to like 10-7? But even that's not going to be like a gigantic step. That's another good step. But to me, I think, Gene, it's Jonas Adu, and I think that's for Tennessee. I think that's the ideal outcome, is that it is Jonas Adu that has the biggest step for them next year.
I would go Adu. I don't know who else can get exponentially better.
Yeah, that was my struggle too, is trying to figure out who would even qualify for a big step next year.
Right. Like, I don't see who can. I don't know if there's, and I'm glad that I'm thinking the guy who asked the question, I think, is also a person who could. I got somebody else for you, and it's Justin Powell. Because
I thought about him. Yeah, you
go from, just to be different than you, because obviously Adu is I think Adu is the answer. But to throw another name in the mix, I would say Powell, because what you expected from Powell and what you got from Powell were two entirely different things. What we forget about that Auburn team that he played for, they were 13-14 that year. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like they, it wasn't like they just took over the world. They were 13-14. Like, that was not a great team. Now, obviously, him being hurt that year, there were, they weren't a great collect, but that was a below 500 team. So, so you had to, put this kid in a position that he may not be natural with, in terms of just being a point guard. And, he obviously did a really good job with it. But now he's trying to be developed into being just more of a flat-out shooter. And, if you do have a situation where he can come off the bench, because I don't see him taking the place, let's just all be honest. What we know is that there are two guys today on April 22nd. There are two guys that we are 1,000% sure going to start next year. Vescovi, should he return, and Josiah Jordan-James. We can just say that and just move on from that. They're both kind of wing hybrids. So now then you throw in probably Eurosh, and Olivier if he's healthy. And then you potentially have the point guard from Indiana, not Indiana State, but the one from St. Louis. So, if you're Powell, you're not going to start. So your role's not going to change an awful lot, but you do have an opportunity there, because now you're going to have to fight for these minutes. Because if you've got Key, if you've already got Ziegler, you've already got Vescovi, you've got the point guard coming in, and the point guard doesn't sound like he can shoot. So, you may have to change some things with that. But, so now you're looking at it, who's going to get these minutes off the bench? If you're Justin Powell, can you beat out BJ Edwards for these minutes? Can you beat out Tyreek Key for these minutes? Should Key come? That's the challenge. And I think that's going to be what you have to watch for, because somebody's going to get those minutes. You're going to play, you played Victor Bailey a lot last year. He didn't play well, but you played him in 25 games or something like that? He played most of the games last season. He was not a bunch of DNPs, which means there were times he was getting in there for 3 to 5, maybe even 10 minutes in a game. So so somebody's got to take those minutes. Somebody's got to take Chandler's minutes. If you're telling me that Ziegler's in the starting lineup, which we think there's a good chance, because I do think it's hard to tell Ziegler, you were a great soldier last year, but be a great soldier again this year and come off the bench. That's tough. I'm just saying, that's tough, because as I noted, whenever the kid committed, I said, try to convince that kid that he's not just as good as Kennedy Chandler. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't as like explosively good, but he was just effective for the most part. Chandler's best was better than Ziegler's.
Yeah.
Ziegler was more consistently good, I'd say, over the course of last season than Chandler. And so, like, those minutes are going to start drying up. So, like, there's somebody who's going to get left out of that. Maybe Powell and Edwards get left out of it. I don't know. I mean, I already have my issues. I always say all the time that B-based kids don't stay. And I hate to say it so bluntly, but I think Edwards is built a little differently than the rest of these kids. And I think that's the type of kid who can be a really good player in Knoxville. But if those results don't come quickly, interesting. Could be very interesting. So, man.
It's funny you say that about Kennedy, Chandler, and Ziegler. Because I'm looking right now, and the box plus minus doesn't always tell the whole story. But on the year, according to the Sports Reference site, on the season, Kennedy Chandler's his plus minus was a positive 9 on the year, like overall, just kind of as an average, I guess, on that for the box. What is box plus minus is what it's called. Was a 9. Yeah. Ziegler's was 7.2. So like that's like you said, that's not a big drop off. Like that's pretty close. And Ziegler and Vescovy was number 1 on the team at 10.5, Chandler 9, Josiah was 8.7, and then Ziegler was 7.2, and then you have Fulkerson at 6. So like that's a that's your top 5. Your top 4 were Ziegler, James, Chandler, and Vescovy. Which I mean, watching the season, that made sense. Like that's the top 4 I would have picked from last year at Tennessee in terms of who had the biggest impact on the season for the Vols. So. Yeah, there wasn't really much of a drop off in just kind of the numbers game there too of Chandler and Ziegler last season in terms of the box plus minus.
Yeah, and I don't know, like it's like those minutes are going to dry up. Like I'll be interested to see. I'm gonna go back to I guess the original question because obviously as usual get out like just way off the grid, but I do think that Powell. Has the potential because if it's not this year, it ain't gonna happen. Because last year you were fighting a couple other guys. I mean, you were fighting Victor Bailey for those minutes. Now you're getting rid of now you lost a 5th-year senior who's transferred on to East Carolina or George Mason, one of those places. George Mason. Mm-hmm. You've lost a 5th-year senior. You've replaced him with a talented freshman. You got to beat that kid out. That's just what it is. It's like you got to beat B.J. Edwards out for those minutes. You're gonna have to fight Tyreek Key for those minutes. Like he may not make it through the season if all of a sudden if Key and Edwards are getting those minutes, then Powell will be in the portal by December, January. Because it ain't gonna happen for you here, kid. Let's be honest. It ain't going to happen for you. You're now third year. I mean, you're not about to be a 3rd-year sophomore. Like, you're a 3rd-year sophomore. And, like, so I'll be interested to see that. I think that kid is built for, like, obviously his struggles for defense. So if, like, B.J. Edwards comes in and he's willing to guard kids 94 feet, ooh, buddy. If Tyreek Key's gonna go out there and guard some people, I don't know about his defensive numbers, but if he goes out there and will lock you down, Powell better shoot 90% during the summer. He better shoot shoot the off the ball in the summer. I'm just saying, because like you gotta find a reason for that man, Rick Barnes, one of the best coaches in the country. You got to find a reason for that guy to play you. And if you can't guard, if you're going to give up 20, damn it, you better score 25.
Yeah, that's no way to put it. If you're going to give up a bunch of points, you got to come back and score a bunch of your own. This is a very, very, very important offseason for Justin Powell, especially, like I said, if Tennessee gets Key and Collins, because there are minutes there for the taking. He's got to go and try to take them. He's got some talented guys to beat out for those minutes. To go back to the question, I think Adu to me is the answer, but I think you're right. Like Powell needs it. Whether or not he does it will be interesting to see, but he needs it and so does they do for Tennessee's success. They need him to have a big jump for next season too. The last question here from again, Andrew asked two questions. I think this next one is interesting. I'm not sure that there's an answer that I have for it. But the question is, do you think Rick Barnes approaches March differently after another short tourney run? And I like that question. I just don't know that what my answer is for it, because I don't really know what all he could, Gene, what from this past year could he have done differently in the regular season to improve Tennessee's chances in the postseason? Because to me, it wasn't that there was anything that was done wrong. I thought actually this year Tennessee did the best job they had done under Rick Barnes, possibly, preparing for March in terms of playing guys early, figuring out rotations. You had an injury, you had to put guys in January and February that you weren't playing a whole lot at earlier points in the year. I thought this year Tennessee was better prepared for March, possibly than they'd ever had been under Barnes, and possibly than they had been in a long time. And then they still get bounced in the second round because they got a bad draw with a Michigan team that they did not match up well against. Because as we've talked about many times on this podcast, the NCAA tournament comes down to matchups. It doesn't really matter. It matters what your seeding is in terms of where you get those matchups and things like that. But at the same time, once you get in the games, your seeding doesn't matter. You're a 3 seed playing an 11 seed. So what? That 11 seed was a Michigan team that had a lot of talent and one of the best big men in the country in Hunter Dickinson, and a guy who also the Bridges kid who just went off for 20-something points in that game, who was capable of doing that at certain points of the season. So, Gene, I don't know what Barnes could do differently, next season or in the next couple of seasons to really approach differently in March. I mean, maybe play the young guys more or earlier in the year, but at the same time, you look at the young guys who played, Kennedy played a bunch of minutes all season, but it wasn't like he wasn't giving minutes to the younger players Brendan Henley, Hatfield. I mean, yes, he basically only got in because of injury, but he was playing minutes and was playing starting for Tennessee. Zachary Ziegler played a lot that last past season. Justin Powell was given many opportunities to play and just didn't take advantage of those opportunities, so that's why he didn't keep playing. Jemai Mashack was put in key moments. He wasn't developed and ready enough to play, too many more minutes, but he was put in a lot of key defensive situations, especially. So I don't really, and of course Adu came in once he had, got over his sickness and kind of started developing a bit more. Then again, injury happened and he was put in there. So you're more basketball savvy than me, Gene. Maybe there's something I'm overlooking, but I don't know how much differently Barnes can approach March than what he has to find success. Sometimes you just get unlucky, and Tennessee and Rick Barnes have had many years worth of experiences of unlucky things happening in March. So I don't know that there's a really good answer to this, for me at least. Maybe you have a better answer than I do, Gene, because I'm at a loss on this one.
I really don't. I mean, he's it's unfortunate because this is one of those play the results thing. He lost in the second round, but he lost to a Michigan team that, it's not like he lost to Loyola. If you look back on all these losses, it's not like they're losing to, they're losing. Look, I understand what everybody's going to say. Well, it's this, that, but he lost to a Michigan team that had top 10 talent in the country, and underachieved for much of the season and had to figure some stuff out, which a lot of teams do. I'm not going to do the thing on this one where, I understand, he lost in the second round, but this time I kind of feel like that's kind of not fair. Just the results are what they are, but it's not like it was some massive upset. I wouldn't look at this as 3 versus 11 as much as it was Tennessee, Michigan. Michigan team that, if I recall, was ranked in the top 10 at one point in the season, early in the season.
I think they may have been top 5 early in the season. I'll check that, but they definitely were top 10.
Yeah, they weren't a team that fell apart. They had a team that had some issues, and obviously the whole situation with Juwan Howard, Will Smithing that guy after the game. I think those are the only things. That's essentially what transpired, and they had some issues, and you listen and you're trying to figure some stuff out, and they had kids that were in and out, and they had to figure some stuff out. But that was also, it's one of those things where it's always man, that's a team that you don't want to play in March. Tennessee had to play him in March. So there's not much you could do with roster construction because I felt like he did as good of a job building the roster up last season as he's ever done, ever. I mean, that 18-19 team, they couldn't get better. They couldn't because they were all back. They were all older guys. That's why they were so good early. That's why everybody says they peaked early. Yeah, they did because they basically rolled out there the first game of the season and they were 100% who they were going to be. You know, like last year's team was an okay team at the start and then got, progressively better over the course of the season to where, some people had them as hey, they could be a whatchamacallit. They could be a national championship contender. People were arguing that they should have been a 1 seed potentially. So I think that I don't think there's really a good answer to that question. I think, basically hope that things work out better for you next time around. Hope that work out better next season. Or maybe it's throughout the course of the season and then, figures it out and gets a low seed and, sneaks into the tournament and makes it to the Elite Eight or Sweet 16 just simply because, people underestimate you because of your record. I mean, that's still Michigan talent, which is comparable. I'd imagine if you look at 24/7 rankings, the caliber of players is probably pretty similar there for a lot of the top 7 or 8 players.
Yeah, and by the way, that Michigan team was preseason number 6, and they jumped up to number 4, I think, because of early season losses to other teams because they beat Buffalo and Prairie View, so it wasn't like they beat anybody to get up to number 4. But they were a top 5, top 10 team, and then just happened to lose early season contests against Seton Hall, against Arizona and North Carolina, and then Minnesota that dropped them out of the poll eventually once they got into early December there. But yeah, I think, I guess maybe go get like if you want to take really overreact from what happened this past year, maybe go get like a big dominating big. But how many of those are in the portal anymore? And how many of those do you think you're actually going to go land for if you're Tennessee? So at this point in time with the roster you have. So I just don't think that there's anything, maybe the next season, maybe that's a thing that you look at and try to get another, like an actual big time kind of big man type of guy, if that's your cup of tea. And Tennessee's had success running offenses through big men, but I mean, like you said, I just don't know that there's really a whole lot differently that you could do. Again, it's just kind of the luck of the draw. It's can you stay healthy? Because I really do think that if Tennessee had Olivier Camois in that game against Michigan, it would have gone differently. Do they win? I don't know. But I think it's a different game if you have Camois in there and you aren't having to rely on 2 true freshmen in your post to play significant minutes in Brandon Huntley Hatfield and Jonas Adu in that game, who no one could contend with Hunter Dickinson. I don't know that Camois would have been able to either, but he's at least savvier than those 2 guys and more athletic. Well, I don't know. John Fulkerson was pretty athletic, but he still has been dealing with injuries and things like that too. But you'd have a better body than. And Urosh was a good enforcer. I don't know. I don't know that it would have gone too much differently. I still think Tennessee would have had a better shot with Camois in there is what I'm trying to say. So I don't think you should overreact and say, because they got beat by a guy with the really dominant big man, Tennessee needs to go find one of those to have success in March. Because I don't think that's the answer necessarily for Tennessee. You need some good big men, but like guard heavy teams are typically the ones that have. Actually, I'm going to look that up at one day and see if that little adage is actually true, that the teams that have the best guard play are the ones that have the most success in March. I'm going to look that up one day. But, Gene, I think that's about as good of an answer as either one of us are going to be able to give. I don't really know if there's a whole lot more that Barnes can do to approach it differently. I mean, I don't know. I will kind of let that one marinate, and maybe that's what we'll revisit in a future episode, because I think it's a really good question of my Andrew, and I don't want to leave it just kind of like there. So I'll let that one kind of marinate in my head a little bit, and we'll come back to it, I think, in a future episode. So thank you to all of you who asked questions. Again, all of those questions, as long as I edited and did the video correctly, should all have popped up on the screen as you guys asked them. So again, thank you all so much for lending your questions to the podcast here for the mailbag edition of the show. If you guys are new here, I don't think I said at the beginning, but if you're new here, thank you. Be looking out for some more mailbag episodes in the offseason. We do those a lot more in the offseason than we do during the season. But hopefully for Tennessee, we'll have some news to report on here in the next I don't know, week or so for Tennessee, for adding some transfers or things like that as well. Hopefully, landing a Tyreek Key or Yuri Collins, and we'll have information on that. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Please give this video a like. Please subscribe to the channel and the podcast. Rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. Would really appreciate all of that. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathaniel, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.